Good morning. I'm Kathy O'Leary, and I serve on the team here at New Roads. If you're here for the first time or for the first time in a long time, welcome. We're so glad you're here, especially if you're here and you're not so sure about God or faith or religion. We're so glad you're here no matter where you are on the journey of life or faith. And I'm so glad to be here and to share with you the fourth week of our message series for Lent, which we have been calling Catholic Guilt. Catholic guilt can mean different things for different people. For me, this idea of Catholic guilt has been reminding me of something that happened when I first started working here at New Roads about 9 years ago. Just 1 month into my brand new job, I went with Father Tom and some others to a conference for about 1,000 parish leaders out in Denver, Colorado. During the conference, there was the opportunity to receive the sacrament of reconciliation, or what some people still call confession. I felt moved to go to confession, so I made my way over to the space where confessions were being held. But as I was walking there, I had this sudden moment of panic. What if I got Father Tom for my confession? I had just started this new job and I wanted to make a good impression. I can handle the standard interview question, what's your biggest weakness? But telling my brand new boss my biggest sins? Not exactly the first impression I was hoping to make. So I'm waiting in line and they have ushers bring you over to the next available priest. As the usher leads me to an open priest, right away I can tell it's not Father Tom. Phew. But as I get closer, I realize it's not Father Tom, it's a priest named Father Soper. I had just met Father Soper earlier that day. He's in an important leadership role at the Archdiocese of Boston. So I didn't get my boss, but basically I got who I understood to be my boss's boss. Seriously, what are the chances? I'm in Denver, and there's over 100 other priests here. I think to myself, if I quit now, this job doesn't even have to go on my resume. But then I come to my senses and I realize there's no way Father Soper is going to remember me. I know how this works. He's this really important priest. He's probably met 100 new people today, and I'm some random assistant at a parish in Belmont. He will not remember me. But then I realize I'm at a conference, so I'm wearing one of those lanyard name tags that has my name in really big, bold letters, Kathy O'Leary. So as I go to sit down in the chair across from Father Soper, I just lean forward awkwardly with my arms crossed, perfectly covering my name tag. This confession is off to a great start, right? Anyway, we go through all the steps, and it was actually a great experience for me and really helpful and even healing. At the end, he absolves me of my sins, and I'm feeling good. And he definitely didn't remember me. And just as I'm about to stand up to leave, Father Soper leans in and he says to me in the most gentle, kind voice, "How are things going in Belmont so far, Kathy?" After an awkward pause, I'm pretty sure my face turned fire truck red as I realized that even though I had tried to hide my name, he knew exactly who I was. I felt like I should get right back in line for my next confession, but I figured with my luck, I'd probably get Father Tom. Well, in this series for Lent, we've been looking at exactly this sort of thing, this messy mix of sin, guilt, and shame. If you missed any of the previous 3 weeks of this series, be sure to check them out on our website, because this is a series that really builds on itself. Today, we're picking up where we left off last week. Last week, we looked at the story of the woman at the well, and we saw that Jesus is not in the business of giving us guilt and shame. Jesus is in the business of freeing us from our guilt and shame. So I think the next most obvious question is, what exactly does it mean to be healed of our guilt and shame? And how does healing happen? Let's dig into that question with the story we hear today from the Gospel of John about a man who was born blind. This is a story about healing, but it also has a really important setup. So here's how it begins. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Now, this may sound like a crazy question to us, but this was the common way of thinking at the time. If something bad happened to you, then you must have done something wrong or deserved it. I think this way of thinking continues today. Have you ever found yourself dealing with something difficult and wondering in the back of your mind, is this happening to me because I did something bad? Or is God punishing me? This line of thinking, this sense of false guilt, can be a huge source of shame in our lives. False guilt is when you feel responsible for something which, in reality, you had no power or control over, like your parents' divorce, or your appearance or body type, or an illness or diagnosis, or your sexual orientation, or abuse that you experienced. Jesus is very quick and direct in rejecting false guilt and rejecting the idea that God gives us suffering or challenge as punishment for our personal sin. He says, neither he nor his parents sinned. Jesus is crystal clear here. Is your suffering your fault? No. Now, we know that sometimes we choose to act in a way that ends up causing us suffering. But God does not send us suffering as punishment. Suffering so often tempts us to play the blame game. And the blame game is always a trap. It's a never-ending cycle of if only and what if and how come. And it neglects to answer the real question that might actually make any difference. What now? This is where Jesus refocuses the disciples and you and me when he says, neither he nor his parents sinned. It is so that the works of God might be made visible through him. In other words, God doesn't punish through pain, but he can bring purpose through pain. He can use it for good. Now, this setup can get us stuck on the question the disciples are stuck on. What is the cause of suffering? It's a big question. We've spent entire message series digging into this, and I'm sure we will again. But Jesus wants to focus our attention not on the reason for suffering, but on the response, his response and ours. So how does Jesus respond to this man's suffering? Well, we already know he's going to heal him, but let's see how he heals this man and what it teaches us about healing. When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva and smeared the clay on the man's eyes. This is some pretty strange stuff, isn't it? What is this all about? Well, in the ancient world, they actually believed that the saliva of a person, especially an important person, had medicinal powers. So it was a little more culturally acceptable, but it was still weird. There's no doubt about it. But as with so much of John's gospel, there are layers of meaning here. This image recalls how the first humans were made. God formed the first human, Adam, from the dust of the ground. In alluding to this story, the gospel writer John is showing that Jesus makes us a new creation. Healing for Jesus isn't about giving us a band-aid and sending us on our way. Jesus wants to restore us and make us whole, even new again. The manner of healing is also noteworthy because not only is it odd, but it's different, it's unique. Jesus performed many healings throughout the Gospels, and each healing was different. Sometimes Jesus healed from a distance. Other times, Jesus came and lay hands on an ill person. Healing will look different for all of us because we all need different things. The story continues. He smeared the clay on his eyes and said to him, "Go and wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed and came back able to see. Up until this point, Jesus had taken all the initiative. The man born blind had done nothing to participate in his own healing. By smearing mud on the man's eyes, Jesus requires something of him, and in turn, of us. We are called to participate in our own healing. Lost my spot here, friends. Let's see. If you look at all of the healings and even all of the miracles of Jesus, they always involve the response of the people involved. He engages them in a dialogue, or there are instructions Jesus gives them, which often don't seem to make any sense in the moment. I'm sure that's what this man was thinking. He wants me to do what? This pool of Siloam wasn't even close by. He had to undertake a journey to get there. But he does. He responds in faith. And it's only after his willing participation that he is healed. And that's not where the story ends. After Jesus heals the man's physical blindness, he is rejected by the religious authorities. But Jesus doesn't reject him. No, Jesus goes out of his way to find him. When Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, he found him. Jesus goes out of his way to find this man whom the religious leaders and religious people had rejected. Maybe you have felt rejected by religious people or religious leaders, but Jesus never rejects you. In fact, when others reject you, Jesus comes out to find you. And when Jesus comes out to find the man born blind, we come to see that this story isn't just about physical healing, it's about spiritual healing. Jesus wants to give this man and us true sight. And again, this healing, it doesn't happen with a snap of Jesus's fingers. Again, the man is called to participate in his own healing. Jesus found him and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered and said, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "I do believe, Lord," and he worshiped him. The man's spiritual insight and spiritual healing only happens as he authentically engages with Jesus. He asks questions. He's humble and curious and persistent on this journey. He participates in his own healing, and he finds himself healed with hope and vision for the future. Jesus' goal for this man and for you and for me isn't a miracle in a moment. It's his power on display for a lifetime. Remember, this whole story starts with Jesus telling the disciples that the works of God might be made visible through him, through this man born blind. It's not the works of God will be made visible through him, it's might. Why is that? Well, on one level, our healing depends on us. The man could have refused Jesus' instruction, not listened, and walked away. We can walk away also. But healing and growth are on the other side of our willingness to take a step of faith. So, how can we do this? How can we participate in our own healing from guilt and shame? When Jesus rubs mud on the blind man's eyes, he tells him, "Go and wash in the pool of Siloam." He tells the blind man, "Go and wash." And he's telling you, go and you need to fill in the blank. Maybe it's go and read this gospel story at home, listening for how God wants to heal you. Maybe it's go and find a counselor to work with, to work through feelings of shame and guilt because it's complicated and you need someone to work with on it. Maybe it's go and apologize or go and confess because you feel awful about what you did to someone and it's eating you up inside. Maybe it's go and make a plan to join us for our worship night in a couple weeks because you sense a call to go deeper, but you need some help hearing God's voice. Maybe it's go and get in a small group. This is how I'm filling in the blank because shame leads me to isolate, and being vulnerable with other people is where I'm finding healing. Go and take a step, even a tiny step of faith. I wonder, can you imagine what miracles, what healing is on the other side of your willingness to respond to what God is doing, to participate in your own healing? I think part of what Jesus wants us to realize with this story is to recognize that, in one sense, we're all born blind. We're all tempted to think, I don't have sin, guilt, or shame. I don't need healing. I don't need growth. I don't have questions. I don't need help. I don't need saving. It all leads to the same place. I don't need God. In being tempted to think we don't need healing and we don't need God, we choose a kind of self-imposed blindness. We refuse to see. We end up hiding from the truth in our own hearts, hiding from others, and hiding from God. When I think back to my story about confession, I can see this so clearly. When I tried to hide who I was from Father Soper, the only person who couldn't see was me. No matter the source of our shame, false guilt, Catholic guilt, failure, or sin, God wants us to experience healing. In the face of our hiding and blindness, I think God does for us what Father Soper did for me. He leans in. He knows us and calls us by name. And his voice is gentle and it's kind. His message is go. Go and fill in the blank. Go and take a step. Go and be healed. So let's go.